Well, my name is Jem Pagan, and I am the partner at Flatiron Strategies, and also I am the managing director for tech strategy for J&K Securities. In my roles within both firms, I'm either architecting business strategies, architecting solutions, or consulting with the executive level on how to best move forward with adoption of future technologies. In my role within J&K Securities, I actually monitor, measure, and research the tech industry. It's a very challenging role because we cover all of technology, media, and telecom. And in that particular role, we look at what's happening in the market. Who are the major players in the market? How is the needle moving? Who's winning? Who's losing? Who's disrupting? Who's being disrupted? And how do we see all of this taking shape in some sort of time cycle? So I'm very, very excited and humbled to be here. And I really am excited to get into an interactive conversation with our panels. So without further ado, I would love if we can start with Peggy. Just give us your overview of your background and your experience, and then we'll move forward into our discussion.
Well, as I've introduced myself to most of you already, my name is Peggy Smedley. I'm the editorial director and president of Specialty Publishing, founded Connected World magazine and the Connected World Conference, really to help most of you understand the Internet of Things. But we also really are focusing now on really this whole world of cyber, because as we connect more of these things to the Internet, our big thing is really trying to say, how are we going to kind of avoid all this thing of being hacked? You know, what's all these cyber breaches that we're talking about, and they're happening every day. So that's why we're here today, and that's why you're all here today. So I really want to thank you for doing that and participating.
All right, I'm Scott Schober, President and CEO of Berkeley, Varitronics Systems. We're a privately held company. We focus in on the security side, but wireless threat detection tools. So any type of tools that could detect any type of threat, be it Wi-Fi, maybe cellular phones coming to secure facility where there's classified information, Bluetooth, or any type of wireless threats at all. We're going to do a little presentation tomorrow. I'll talk specifically about that. And we brought a few of the tools back there as well that we could demonstrate on the breaks and things like that, learn a little bit more about us. But again, looking forward to a nice discussion here, and just wanted to thank everybody that we could be part of this wonderful event.
Hi, I'm Johnathan Ratner, Vice President of Six Skill Technologies. My background is in finance. I've been part of the management of hedge funds with a concentration in Homeland Security. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. I've been living in Israel since 1987. I'm part of the community of startups in Israel. I've been involved in Citibank's Technology Accelerator with a biometric company, and have been focusing over the past few years in cybersecurity companies.
Hello, I'm Seth Danberry, co-founder and president of Grid 32. I have almost 20 years of experience working in IT and security solutions across military, government, and the private sector. Grid 32, we provide penetration testing and vulnerability assessments. People hire us to try to break into their network and show them where the problems are before the bad guys do.
Fantastic. And since you have the mic, we'll start with you. So as our roundtable description states, we've seen cybersecurity evolve from the lone state to organized or sponsored state attacks and so forth. My background in the government tells me that this is nothing new. In the government world, we saw this all the time. We've seen this for years. However, now that the private sector is being introduced to these types of exploits, where do you think we are as far as the beginning, in the middle, or towards the end of this game in terms of how these attacks and the sophistication of these attacks are impacting the digital world?
Well, unfortunately, I think we're just at the beginning of it. I mean, we're seeing an explosion from it. Even on my side, what we see is sort of a little different than what people see publicly, because we're actually involved in the companies. We're simulating attacks. We're being called into companies that maybe don't publicize what's going on. So we see a vast explosion of this. The threats are changing dynamically. Attackers are going after sort of the path of least resistance, as we call it, where what was the threat yesterday may be different tomorrow, because as something gets defended better, they shift their focus. A good example of that is the fraud with state tax refunds this year. Last year, we saw it a ton on the federal level with people going after tax refunds. The IRS and the Fed put a bunch of security measures in place. So this year, the attackers have just shifted over to the state level. to the point that TurboTax actually had to shut down their state filings this year for a short period of time. And they're still not allowing you to file state returns without linking it to your federal return because of the amount of fraud. So things shift, and we're at the very early stages of this, and it's sort of a scary landscape out there. Fantastic.
Yes, Johnathan.
In terms of growth and development of, I'm going to call hacking, in Israel, there's actually something called HackerU. And I think maybe in Hebrew it doesn't have the same negative connotation, but I'm like, how could you call something HackerU? It's like Bad Guy University. But there really is such a thing. It's actually white hackers. They're ethical people learning a profession in cybersecurity. But Sixgill and our activity is on the dark web. And that really is HackerU. That is school for bad guys. And what I see, we see the posts where we get information from the forums on the dark web. And I see there, interestingly, there's a lot of newbies. There's people who are coming on and they downloaded the Tor browser, so they're able to go into the dark web, but they're there to learn. And there are people there to teach. So there are people going onto the dark web to learn how to hack and how to get information from networks and then to sell it. So there's this huge, I'd almost say, infrastructure of crime, of hacking that is growing and developing. And so if we're behind and we don't take really resolute action in order to change the playing field, we're going to get further behind.
And Scott, to that point, what's the motivation? What is the primary motivation for organized attacks as opposed to lone wolf approaches towards cyber hacking?
Good question. It does vary from group to group. In some cases, it's so they get recognition, so they can go up in the ranks of the hacker world. It sounds crazy and sounds silly, but that's the mindset of a lot of hackers. In other cases, it may be for monetary gain, where they're actually trying to collect credentials. They're trying to hack and steal credit cards or whatever their goal is, and now they're going to sell them to the next party down the line. So it varies greatly. But we've seen a huge ramp up in problems, everything from the small level, private level, certainly on the government side. Again, our focus is more on the wireless threat detection tools. And now there's a lot more money that's being invested to keep government facilities secure, so these wireless threats don't get inside there, so nothing can be compromised. So we're seeing spending across the board, but one concern that we do have is the lack of knowledge when you go from different industries, and that's huge. So sharing this information and helping people learn is important. Oh, they can't hear? I thought I was yelling. You're up. Yeah, it's on.
Do we think we need a little more volume?
Okay.
We're good on the recording, so.
All right.
If you guys can't hear, let me know.
We'll talk a little louder then. You got to yell, Peggy. I can do that.
Well, Peggy, I have another question. And if we were to borrow a page from other sort of approaches towards dismembering organized crime, we've always had the luxury of following the trail of the money. Why is it so difficult to leverage this same approach towards organized cyber criminals? Why can't we just simply follow the money like we've done, over the history of other sort of dismantle organized families, organized crime rings, and so forth? What is the barrier in this particular case? And I'll open this up to the entire panel as well.
Well, I think it's interesting because now they've gotten, and everybody will say, it's whatever you want to call it now, the dark web, the deep web, or whatever, but it's how they're doing it now. And now we have, the way they do it is Bitcoins, right? They come out and they find a new way to hold everybody up to ransoms. And it's not, and it's an interesting way of going about things. And I'll tell you a story, because we've all talked about all these stories are the large amounts of events that occur, these stories that are happening. We hear about Target. We hear about what's happening to all the big hacks, the billion-dollar hacks. But now the way they're doing it is very strategic in small amounts. We just had this incident where my hometown, I should say in Illinois, not my hometown, but Midlothian, they held up a police station, a police department. Now, talk about the gall, the arrogance of this. We talk about it, right? They held up a police department for only $500. They said, we're going to hold up what you have, and we're not going to give you your computer and the software, but we want you to pay, and what it would be equivalent to, it's not, but $500 or what you would say in Bitcoin. So it's more money in Bitcoins, right? But we're going to talk about that in dollar amounts. And they said, you pay us $500 or whatever equivalent in Bitcoins. So the concept behind that is saying it's a ransom. So the police department paid it. The police department paid the ransom. What did we just do by paying that ransom? We set a precedent. That's what's happening. So now, somebody says, well, I'm not going to deal with it. It's so small. It's a minor amount of money. It's a precedent-setting opportunity. So nobody's going to go after them because they say it's a small amount of money. But what do? What happens when your bank account is hacked? They tell you to watch for the small amounts. That's where the bigger hackings occur. So these guys work, and Scott and I have had this conversation. They learn from each other on the deep and dark web. They train each other. They work together. Whereas we here, and as we're talking about here on the panel, we don't cooperate as well. When we talk about these hacks, we're all trying to keep them secret. We don't want everyone else to know we've been hacked because we're embarrassed as a company. But that's part of the problem. We have to admit we've been hacked so we can learn to improve upon it. That's what I would say, why you can't follow the money as readily here in the United States.
Another distinction I would draw between breaking up organized crime in terms of families of crime in the U.S. is the international aspect of cybercrime. So a lot of both the Bitcoin and other ways, one of the main topics of conversation that we see on the dark web are people who, after somebody has a list of username and passwords for accounts at a major international bank, somebody else knows how to take the money out. And so there's different role players in the infrastructure of this organized crime, and a lot of it is in countries that are not helpful in solving these crimes and going after. So Brian Krebs' book, Spam Nation, you read a lot about the Russians. I lived a year in Russia, and the predominant evil of, it was a different regime then, but there's the widespread poverty and the idea that it's okay to steal from rich Americans, plus the enmity between today's, let's say, Putin. You're not going to get any cooperation there. So if the money's going to Romania or to Russia or to Iranians or to whoever it is outside U.S. boundaries, so it's going to be very hard to follow the money there.
Let's stay there for a moment. And, well, if you want to, I'll wait until you contribute. So
the only other point I wanted to make is that it's also very easy to scrub the money with the international techniques that these people have. Brian Krebs' book actually mentioned that as well, how there's legitimate pay processors who are siphoning this money through, sort of masking it, and it's very hard to follow it. You couple that with Tor and other anonymizing techniques, it's just an endless trail you can never get to the end of and find the real perpetrator.
So, yes.
Just to add that, we're all giving Brian Krebs a plug. He should have came here, right? We invited him, but he was tied up. He didn't make it. But I was on a couple weeks ago with him on NPR, and we did a segment on ransomware. And part of the thing that we did identify in that segment is just the fact is what they mentioned. They're being anonymous, that these cyber thieves, when they're anonymous behind their computer, they do so much more damage. And of course, they're using Bitcoin. They can route the traffic, as was mentioned there, using the Tor network, the Tor browser. There's a lot of tools and toolkits that are readily available and very affordable that they could do this without getting caught. So when somebody has that ability, they can't make but a couple dollars an hour. Now here they can make hundreds of thousands of dollars by placing this malicious ransomware on people's computers remotely, as well as now that the target is really the mobile devices. All of the mobile devices in our pocket, that's the target where they're now facing, especially on the Android devices. So we got to keep that in mind. That's where they're focusing their energy, and it's easy for them to do, and it's easy to capitalize, and they're keeping the amount small, as what Peggy mentioned there, $300 to $500, and they're going to escalate the payment each week. And of course, as people give in and they pay that ransom, we're emboldening them and allowing them to remain anonymous and try to go after the next victim, really. That's the problem.
And I'll just add, I think we don't realize the significance of the little amount becomes that big amount. And I think that's why we don't pay attention, because we're like, it's no big deal. And none of us are fazed by a small amount that appears on our credit card. And when we think about it, and we think about all of this, we're like, oh, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to chase it. I don't have time for it. But see, they're smarter than the average bear. They figure, well, they know you're not going to waste your time with it. But think how many people they're tapping with that. How many people they've been able to get. And it adds up, it adds up, it adds up. And then they become very profitable that way.
And I wanted to further dissect the experience around what you guys have just described. I have a friend who was actually hacked, and he paid the ransomware. He had no choice. They used encryption and all of the 20 whatever bit encryption algorithm you want to name. These guys were fantastic in using the same technology that we use to protect our data. They actually used to protect their data once they took it from this individual. And I wanted to talk to him after he paid the ransom. And my question was, how do you know they're not coming back? And he said, I have no indication, no way, no level of comfort in knowing that they're not coming back. And I said, well, what do you see this as a future sort of state? Where do you see this going? And he said, I see this as one of those necessary evils, a necessary part of doing business in the future, that I may have to begin to budget or have insurance around this type of exploit. Do you think that we're actually seeing a new industry emerge around ransomware, where it's not just a crime, it's an accepted sort of state of doing business?
You just gave the insurance industry a whole new level of business, I mean, that's really what's going to happen. But look at how many, and I hate to say this, think about when you have an employee that sues you for something, and what is the typical line that you say? It's a cost of doing business, and you just settle with that employee because you say it's easier to settle than to go to court. So what's going to happen? That's going to be a mindset of business because you say it's the way of doing business. I hate to say, but that's really what's going to happen.
Just to add, when you talk about the concept there of ransomware, what a lot of people fundamentally forget is what can you do to prevent it from happening? There's only limited stuff that you can do, but what can you do that we should all be doing, we're probably not all doing, is backing up. The most obvious thing that doesn't really cost you anything. Because what happens, the people that are paying the ransom are the people that did not properly back up their computers or sync or back up their mobile phones. Because guess what? If somebody's got the gun to your head and says, hey, pay me $500, how are you going to respond if you have a backup? You say delete, move on, right? It doesn't threaten you. But that's really the problem. So sometimes the basic things, backing up, and I tell people all the time, do you have a regular program? And it could be backing up to a secure cloud. That's fine. That's okay. Or maybe you have a drive that you back up to. Could be a USB stick if it's real important files. You take it off-site. Whatever your backup plan is, if you don't have one, make sure you put one in place. That way you don't have to worry as much about being a victim of ransomware.
I'd like to look into a brighter future and beg to disagree with Peggy that just like it's been said that we're at early stages of this, and the crime is still growing and developing, but the crime fighting is also growing and developing, and we are not going to give in to the bad guys entirely and accept that, yeah, people can come in and hold me up, and I'll just pay the bad guys and go on with my day. That can't be. So what Scott is mentioning about effective backups, whether we'll have effective tools to combat ransomware, but I reject that that'll become the ordinary course of business. We need to do the right things. We need to fight crime. That includes law enforcement and the government playing its role to fight these guys so that we're not at the bay in the will of the bad guys.
Another thing besides backing up is end user training. That's another thing that can really help prevent these crypto ransomware attacks being perpetrated when the end users are aware. Another thing is testing them on it. Some people are cognizant of this, but they sort of don't think it's actually going to happen. So end user training and testing and simulating attacks can be very helpful. And another point on the amount that the attackers are asking and backing up, I've actually seen companies who have paid the ransom because for $400, these crypto, they usually take 3 or 4 days while they encrypt everything before they sort of pop up on your screen and let you know it's happened. And the cost to rerun the data, even if they do restore backups from 3 to 4 days ago, it's more than $400. So I've seen companies just pay it just to get back to business. So it's sort of scary that there's not an easy way out. It's going to cost you one way or the other.
And I guess I'm curious. I'll I'll ask the audience. How many
I'm
of
already
you?
there.
That's what I'm
I'm
curious.
already there. We have a gentleman in the black. And let's challenge the response, because that's a great question. And when I was a CISO and I had at the time 80,000 employees, I have to tell you, there was just no way that I was going to deliver comprehensive training to 80,000 employees across 52 agencies. So I checked the box. I got the best I could as far as some sort of a e-learning solution, but at the end of the day, it failed in comparison to the very sophisticated phishing attacks that we see. So I really want to challenge us to just go to the next level and really talk about this, from a very transparent and candid perspective. What can we really do? Should we sponsor our own internal phishing exercises on a regular basis, on a random basis? Should we allow analytics to actually profile from an HR perspective our most vulnerable employees and put specialized training in front of them as opposed to the more seasoned guys? Or are we going to continue to have one training solution for all when we have different competency levels within the organization? Help me understand, how do we really dig into real effective training and not the checkbox, business as usual? CISO says, I did my job, I delivered the training, and these guys just won't listen. And that back and forth finger pointing just adds to the confusion and the disruption. So help me out. Help me understand where we go with the real.
I'll let these guys answer first, but and then I'll tell you what I think.
Just a brief comment on that. I do think training is essential. It has to come from the top down, though. It can't just be at the IT level where we expect people to get the basics, because that'll be a failure, and
Scott,
that's what's happening.
That's a good point, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is a good conversation. I'm a member of the CTO Club, as you know, and it's a very interesting group. We close the doors, and it's very transparent. So some of the CTOs, major corporations, Fortune 50, Fortune 100, they said the biggest offenders were the CFOs and the CEOs of the organization. That these guys just clicked on a button and almost transferred $8 million. If it were not an internal fake me out phishing exercise, if it were real, they would have transferred $8 million. And they said the email just seemed so real. So I gotta really challenge us to say, what can we do? Is it time for us to develop applications internally that build analytics and anti-phishing into our day-to-day scheme? And let's not talk about the domain games that are being played. Because if anyone has a Gmail account, you can add a dot or a plus, you can concatenate that email, and it gets parsed and pushed through like any other email, which is one of the primary tools or tricks of the phishing exercises. So when you say top down, you're dead on. What do we give these guys at the executive level that's different from the day-to-day workers? What type of training do they need? Because the attention span is very short. Okay, I won't pick on the execs. Let me give it back to you, but just help us understand, like, what can we do that's really effective?
Well, I think when you self-test your organization, you're only going to get a limited result. You're going to get what you want to hear, in a sense. What you do need, and probably more to the point of what Seth's company does, you need an independent third-party outside company to identify what are the vulnerabilities, what are the risks, where are people lacking in security, and then you could identify those, and then you could sit down and have that conversation with upper management and the CEO and say, hey, look, here's where your 5 areas you were weak in. You got to address these areas immediately, or you're going to be the victim of a hack, or you're going to have your employees click on a phishing scam or be a victim of something.
Thank you, Scott.
I agree with what Scott says, and having an outside company come in and simulate an attack before it actually happens is the difference is remarkable to the companies. We were doing a pen test with a company, and we were doing a spear phishing campaign against the top level executives, and they were falling in droves. He called me up and he says, what am I supposed to do? I test these people, I train them, I don't know how to make this stop. And I said, show them the results of this test, and run live tests against them. When they see that they're the reason, they were the ones who caused the breach to occur, and again, this wasn't a real breach, but a simulated one, it sort of opens their eyes and realizes not only am I really going to be tested on this and people are watching, but this is embarrassing if I'm the person who has this. So there's a lot of companies, we offer this, but many companies offer this now, the simulated phishing attacks, where when a user does click the link, rather than a malicious payload or a virus installing on the computer, it prompts them to train, or it gives them a warning that they need to call the IT department. So it's more of a training tool rather than actually causing them harm, and the results are much better once you do that inside your company.
I really have a belief on this, and I go back to the 80s when we had Jack Welch teaching everyone to be black belts. We need to go back to that. I have this belief that if you're going to get this to work at any organization, it has to be top down. And I know that's what Scott was saying, but take it even a step further, and that's what Seth's saying. You can sit there and say, the CEO can say, I don't know what to do with everyone, and that's what you're saying. But make those CEOs be the ones that are having to do this. Make them be the ones and seeing what they're doing wrong. Because if you look at the Anthem attack and you look at what happened, there were executives who were the ones that kept doing on the emails wrong. They're the ones that let that malware in. So they're the ones that have to champion this. And then they're the ones that have to say, this is what we're going to do on a regular basis. This is the testing we're going to do. And they're going to be the ones that do it. They don't have to micromanage it, but they need to understand it, and they need to be the ones who implement it across, top down, and you watch how it's going to change. Then it'll go back to what you're saying, Johnathan, about that maybe we're always going to have attacks. We understand that because we always have bad guys. No matter what, whether we believe guns kill, people kill, whatever it is, the concept is that the attacks are always going to be there. But the concept is we have to do something, and the point is we're going to always pay something because we're always going to have problems. But the concept behind all of this, unless we are the ones that get up there and aggressively stand there as executives and put that knowledge from top down, it's not going to change. And I know I'm overly passionate. Listen to my radio show. You hear me say it all the time. It's because unless we do something, it's just going to be the same old over and over.
We have another question, and then I'll get to you, sir.
Not a question, but I totally agree, Peggy. What's about to happen or what's happening is C-level executives are getting fired, right? So now that we are firing these folks for not taking social awareness in our cultures, running our organizations, it's happening right now, right? Darwinism is survival of the fittest. Well, the survival of our leaders today will be, are they cyber savvy or are they not? And so, luckily, that's what's about to happen. It is happening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do we need to take the focus not just internally within businesses, but outside with the general population? Because what we have, just like you said about cyber is a lot of people in our society nowadays are thinking, well, we're such a cyber savvy society because we know how to open Facebook, we know how to Twitter. I'm cyber savvy, but they don't understand the technology behind it or the risk associated with it, and there's nothing being done in that area to teach from, even before you get to professional age, the risks that are associated with technology. By the time you get to where you're a 40-year-old CIO or whatever, you're so cyber savvy that you don't have to listen to that IT person, and you end up with the problems.
I'd like to comment on what I might call the end of the age of innocence. And living in Israel, where security threats are a part of everyday life, so there's a compromise. And always security and personal freedom are really two opposing sides of a spectrum, where before I walk into the train station, I have to stop and let somebody go through my bag. Okay, so that's an invasion of my privacy, but I accept that I need to do that so the train doesn't get blown up. So Americans are really lucky. Great country, great oceans, and great neighbors. So the bad guys have traditionally been far away. World wars have been fought on a different continent. 9/11 was this huge wake-up call. Bad things happened in our own country. The whole cyber experience brings the bad guys really close. They may live far away, but they're just one click away. So with that capacity to do business internationally and to live in the global village, so the bad guys are our neighbors. And so growing up in a tough neighborhood, you have to be a little bit more of a tougher kid. And so you're right, that it's not only in the C-suite that they need to learn about cybersecurity, it's the 8th graders and the 5th graders. I mean, the little kids that are going around with the iPhones and growing up cyber. So growing up cyber means you need to grow up a little bit more tough and aware of the dangers out there. And so that has to become a part of the education of all of us.
So when you compared sort of like, the experience in Israel to America, I thought that was fantastic. Could you just give me a little more as far as, we have some pretty hot topics on the agenda from a White House perspective. We have a cybersecurity framework. We have some new initiatives. Some think we're going far enough. Others think we haven't gone far enough. How much of our privacy should we be willing to sacrifice for the greater good of our society?
It's a hard question, of course. I might say it's a personal question, but I don't really think that. I think it's a societal question. And I don't want to, I'm an American, okay? I have an American passport. As I said, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. But there is an exaggerated sense of entitlement in the U.S., which is to our detriment when we're faced with real cyber threats, cyber terrorism, cyber war. So the bad guys are totally serious about this. And the players, we know the players, whether it's in Russia or China or North Korea or the radical Islamists. So they're dead serious about hurting us, stealing our money, working with criminals, and learning from their tricks and hiring them. So we are going to have to accept that despite the fact that I have a big car and I live in a big house and I have a great big country, but I'm exposed. And we're all exposed. And in as much as that's the case, we need to be realistic about our personal freedoms and our privacy. And it may be that government is going to need to take a little more forthcoming role in regulation, demanding of critical infrastructure, to have certain levels of disconnection from the net. It could be that the ISPs are going to have to be looking into what's going across the backbone. And I mean, recently the US, after the Sony thing, right, they closed the internet in North Korea, okay? But how much damage did that do to North Korea? They're not a cyberized country. The US is. And so our vulnerability is very great. So all of us play a role in defending all of us. And so although it's painful and uncomfortable and un-American for us to give away any of our personal freedoms and privacy, but I think it's the price that we will have to pay to a certain degree in order to guarantee our collective freedom and continued success.
Thank you, Johnathan. I know that was not easy. I appreciate your transparency and sharing. So we're close to the final few minutes. I wanted to kind of delve into the future state. What do you see as the next gen solutions to combat these organized cyber terrorists? Are we in a place where we need to quickly figure this out, or do we need to identify the innovation that's already, in the R&D labs, already poised to go to market? Are there techniques? We don't need to name companies, but what I want to understand is that are there certain techniques, certain technologies, certain sort of solutions that we need to be aware of as we move forward into the next generation of digital experience?
Well, I think one of the things we need to look at is that the market needs to demand security. I think that's a problem today where everyone's running towards sort of ease of use and functionality and what they're looking for in their software, their programs, their systems, but the market needs to dictate what do they want out of their systems, and security needs to be a major factor in that. And another thing, and this kind of ties into that, is government regulations, where the government can put laws and regulations into place that require encryption of data, and the sort of secure architectures of our systems that will sort of call on that and force the market.
Thank you.
one of the developing aspects of cybersecurity that I was reading in Price Waterhouse's their assessment of cybersecurity in America and across the world is the aspect of intelligence, cyber threat intelligence, as opposed to being reactive and forensic, but looking ahead, who's out there and what's going to be happening to me. So that's something that I'm involved in my company. But as in general, the idea of cyber threat intelligence about not only looking behind us, but looking forward to see what might be threatening us in order to take preemptive action.
I think I'm in line with that too. Being proactive about it. I think up to now or up to maybe a year ago, most companies that I've talked to, even just the average person, they hear about it, they read about it, but it doesn't affect them. I always pose the question, I think I have even at some of the events that you've hosted, Jem, how many people has it touched their lives? And maybe even just to ask the audience, has anybody here had been a victim of maybe their credit card compromised? Anybody? So has your credit card been, keep your hands up, have you ever had yourself, maybe your checking account compromised? A couple more hands went up. Some went down. You're supposed to keep your hands up.
That's scary.
Have you been hacked in any other way? Website, Twitter, whatever the case may be. So it looks like maybe about half the audience here has been hacked, and that's part of the problem. It hasn't touched everybody. Once it touches you, probably the hands that went up, you probably do things a little bit differently once you were compromised. I know it happened to us in our company. We're a security company, and yet we had compromise. So when you think about that, when it touches home, you start to take best practices, you put them to place. You start to change your passwords, and they become very complex to the point they don't make any sense and you can't remember it. You think differently. You shred documents. You do all the things we probably should be doing, but most people are actually neglecting. So I always encourage people just to do the basics to start with, but the problem's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. We're only at the tip of the iceberg here.
And I think Seth was right when he said about thinking security, everybody thinks about things like ease of use when they develop programs and things like that. Security has to be first and foremost on anything we do. When I talk to all these companies. I have the luxury to be a journalist of taking a 10,000-foot overview and listening to all the companies. And security is never the first thing they ever pitch to me, ever. It's the last thing they pitch, how great their product is, how fast and ease of use, and how company, the customer is going to be happy with it. I never hear a security pitch ever, 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 except when now that I'm talking security companies. But it's amazing. It's just not happening. And it's only because now we're going out there and we're just drilling it home. And it's amazing, but it just doesn't happen. And that's the problem. We're looking at things backwards. And even today, we're doing an event on security. And I would say 95% of the traditional companies I deal with on the Internet of Things who are on my 100 list are not present today at this event. And they are trying to convince you should be putting their products up and buying their products, and they are the leading companies on the Internet of Things, and they are not at this event today. Why? Why are we involved with them? They're not even concerned that you're secure with their products. That frightens me. And they have billions of dollars in the marketplace today. And they're the Ciscos and the Intels and all those companies out there, the Qualcomms of the world. And are any of them in this room today? Makes me scared. How about you?
I can see a lot on that subject. We have about 3 minutes left. Did you have another question? Or a comment? Or you just super focused on our discussion because your body language is saying, let me speak. And
I would have not been here. I would have no idea that whether I could click that email or
basic level, even in the school, just make sure that some course is there for the students to make them understand that how long is the email password, can it be hacked, and what is phishing, what is malware. Just give them a brief, and even post pictures on Facebook that credit card stolen, this is how it does. It's explained in the process. This would have been the best.
Good comment. I have 2 minutes, and I want to make sure I get your.
Yes, if I may just interject, much of the discussion in this segment, both I think from the audience and from the panel, has been, gee whiz, the problem is in the city. A big chunk of the problem is in the city. And those are the ones who have all the power. A glimpse inside that C-suite. Gary and I spent a lot of time in boardrooms around the world. And with the most dysfunctional Congress in the history of the institution, with a lame-duck president demonstrating now facing a adversarial Congress that he's willing to whip out the pen and accomplish with executive order what he knows he will never get through either the Congress or perhaps constitutional muster on his block. Here's what we're hearing from those C-suites, is that, under those perfect storm conditions, if there's anything incoming coming to the U.S., I'm not talking about a 911
Right.
attack, but something that is successfully executed on foreign soil. Just as the Congress did a little over 30 days after 911 with its Whip Out of USA Patriot Act, in an effort to establish its operational relevance and prove to the folks back home that they are tough on terror. The fear is this may set into motion something akin to Sarbanes-Oxley for CEOs for cyber. Now,
That is very consistent with what I'm hearing as well.
and it goes deep. You talk to folks at DHS and they say, we've got the toughest job in the world within the NQ. If you're within the .gov, .mil, you're inside the castle. You're inside the moat. Everybody else is out there with the alligators. You're on your own. We know what the charter says for DHS, but that's the lay of the land.
Right.
And so the reluctance for constituent groups, private sector, to share with private sector their battle damage assessment, their cyber attack BDA, is what? Loss of proprietary advantage. Because if it gets back to the shareholders, the board of directors, the financiers, the suppliers, the Regions Bank, that they're sharing that with Wells Fargo, look out. And the flip side of that is, if we share it with the government, all we're going to do is increase regulatory scrutiny. Look at how many fines and penalties J.P. Morgan has paid on one bad bet on the whale in London. Might this be one occasion where academia provides that honest program? To use something like that model that I put up, where we bring the BDA in, we anonymize it from the standpoint, we don't care if it's
Right.
Regions or J.P. Morgan Chase or Wells Fargo. But if we can then from that do the analytics, develop best business practices for the financial services industry, and then push those out to the community. And if there's something embedded in that analytical process that rises to the level of threat to national security, they go into it knowing we're going to share that with the agency.
Now you take him a speech tomorrow. Very good point.
Just an idea to contemplate.
Very, very good point.
That the academics are the ones most uncomfortable with that. It might be, and my fear is it may take that next 911 like event before we get to that decision, or we just stop talking.
So somebody had a free market suggestion to do that, right? To offer up architectures and things that are more pure, right? That doesn't get into anybody's business. It's a suggestion. It's best practice. So, that's not a regulation. It's not a need. Maybe free market can get it.
Good point. But you're going to need that analytics and that aggregation of data. That's where the insight is, just in my humble opinion. But I fully agree. We are over time. Please forgive me. I usually am on point, but this is a very, very enlightening discussion, and I think it was worth 3 extra minutes. Let's thank our panelists.